And then as a BA, what you need to do with respect to the approval of the requirements, you need to understand the stakeholder roles. You can't just go to a person who doesn't have any say in this, or who doesn't have any decision-making power, and you can't just go to them and then explain everything to them, then spend a lot of time, effort, and money into convincing them, and finally realizing that they don't have any say. Why do you spend all the effort, time, and money with somebody who doesn't have a, who, for example, in every organization you've got this, for a decision around 20,000 pounds, you've got the person taking the employee or the worker is responsible for, from 20,500 pounds to 500,000 pounds, the manager would be responsible. Anything above 500,000 pounds to a million, their boss, the director of that business unit, will take a decision. And anything about £1 million value worth of decision or sale or anything, then it's taken over. The particular decision is taken by the CXO, whether it's a CIO, CTO, CMO, whatever it is, the chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, chief information officer. So they would take a decision. Anything over £1 billion would obviously be taken by the board, the governance board, right? So there's a sense of that kind of what we say slab system, in terms of what kind of decision at what level could be taken, involving what amount of money or what amount of resources. So you need to really understand that role of the respective stakeholders so that you can approach to them. And then obviously that would mean that you always have this conflicts and differences of opinion coming in across different stakeholders. We discussed that at length. We need to understand that, being able to identify where the potential conflicts could come through, and then be able to manage those conflicts and the issues in a way that's more like an amicable situation. It's not about resolving conflicts in a fight situation, but more professionally, how can we address that? And obviously that would mean that we need to gain the consensus, get the advice of the people in a way that is not offending. You cannot always agree to everything, but it can always be agreeable, right? So that's what they say. You should be agreeable, but you don't need to agree with everything. So that sense of consensus, even though they don't have initial buy-in into that, but then you discuss, you bring the thing over, get the people onto the table, and then surface the issues, bring it out, talk about the pros and the cons, give the data supporting to that, and help them make an informed decision, and a decision which is actually driven by data. And then with that, everybody else, even though initially the rest of the stakeholders might not be agreeing with them, but then because of the fact that you've got supporting data, you've got all these examples, evidences, and illustrations, they would then be able to align their decision with what has been agreed upon. So they would reluctantly say, okay, fine, I got it now, why you think that way. And then obviously once that approval is there, you would then be able to track and communicate that. Things like meeting minutes, for example, minutes of the meeting would really help as an initial point. What has been discussed in the meeting? What's the agenda? What's the outcome? So what was the kind of minutes? What was the discussion points? What were the decisions taken? And then once that is there, you move that from the minutes of the meeting into a backlog, so it's tracked there. So that requirement, that would be tracking as a requirement, and from there the traceability would flow through. Requirement would become an architectural element, and the design aspect, and then the code, and finally into the build, so and all the way up. So that's how we can track and finish whatever decision has been taken about that. So in terms of getting a sign off on the requirements, there are different ways. Sign off could be, some people call it as sign off, some people call it as a formal acceptance, some people call it as a buy-in, some people call it as an agreement or acceptance. It doesn't matter. End of the day, it's all about an approval, getting an approval on the requirement or a decision or a change. So stakeholders may not always understand how to read the business requirement documents, or they may not be in a position to understand the business impact of what we're trying to propose. So we as BAs, we need to kind of get that across to them, get that point across to them in a way that they're able to understand the business. So sometimes it could be technology person looking at that. It could be the business person looking at a technology requirement, or a vice versa. So we need to speak that requirement, to explain to them in the language that they understand, so that they can then take an informed decision about it, right? So that's the way that we as BAs could bring value to the team and to the organization. And for that, to be able to speak in their language, their lingo, sometimes we need to use different tools, different techniques, different ways of doing things. So sometimes it could be pictures, it could be it could be, as I say, pictures worth 1,000 words. You could actually use videos, pictures, you can use illustrations, you can use sketches, mock-ups, mind maps. Now you can do lists, grid views. You can actually do a user journey or a customer journey in terms of taking the customer through their typical life cycle or life in a typical day in their life, kind of a thing. You can weave a story around it. You can create a storyboard. So all of these different techniques could be used to bring forth the importance of what we're trying to propose. And then once they understand it better, then they will be in a better position to take a decision about that. So that's, you're trying to help the stakeholders, the customers, the users, to be able to take a decision based on the information that they have, that they can kind of digest and they can understand, and they can then say, yes, this is a good thing, or this is a bad thing, right? So that's our responsibility to be able to. That's where we can play a significant role as BAs to be able to communicate this aspect to the stakeholders and the customers and the users. And then how would you get the sign off on requirements? Again, we will get them in different formats. You got this kind of meetings, for example. You can arrange meetings with them. If it is senior management or senior stakeholders, you can then have interviews or one-on-one sessions. If it's with the middle management or lower management kind of people, then we can have workshops. We can put them all into one room. We can then put the agenda. We can talk about, these are the discussion points, these are the pros, these are the cons, and then we can present them the findings from our assessments and list out the unknowns in a logical manner. Again, these are some things. Again, if it is a discovery, it's about a new stuff that has never been done. It's a new thing that we as an organization have been trying to do for the first time around. So it's more of exploration. It's about trying to do something new, something different from the usual. So it's all about the identification of the unknowns, the risks, the opportunities, the benefits, the significant ways that we could benefit as an organization. Again, the tangible and intangible costs and benefits, right? And then we present everything up front and give them enough data, support yourself with the data, and then give a visual alignment to it. So try and use some kind of aids, visual aids like wireframes, prototypes, the mock-ups, sketches, trying to bring again all of these into use charts and graphs, for example, to make your point. All of these are different ways to convince them of what the benefit is going to be or what the impact is going to be. And if the purpose is to facilitate, it's not about discovery, but you're trying to facilitate a workshop. You're trying to find a consensus among different stakeholders to bring them to a consensus or a unity in terms of a particular decision. If there's a conflict, then you're trying to actually bring up the conflict. This is what the CTO has got to say. This is what the CMO has got to say. The marketing person has got a different view than the technology infrastructure person. So this is what they've got to say. Can we discuss why you think that way? Why do you think this is happening? Do you have any reasons why you think strongly about it? Do you have any examples? Do you have any other case studies? What is the reason why you're thinking that way? So you try and facilitate a discussion amongst these different stakeholders so that they could actually kind of give their view or their understanding of that particular point in a way that is making more sense. And then you can try and facilitate for a discussion, healthy discussion, and then that would lead into a particular decision taking at the end of it, either a yes or a no. And if the purpose is to validate, for example, then obviously that means that you need to either have some kind of assumptions, a hypothesis that you need to validate or verify. Then you need to put forth that one, and then you need to make sure that they understand the pros, again, the two sides of that, or multiple sides of that. This is, again, that's where you can use some tools like the balanced business scorecard, for instance, which gives you multiple perspectives. If we try and incorporate this decision, It affects our customers, it affects our learning and development, it affects our internal process, it affects our financials. And how does it affect? Again, you go through in depth into each of those. So you have some structure, some framework to think about so that you're not missing any point. So you can use some of those techniques like that. Again, once you get that kind of validation, either yes to the hypothesis or no, whatever it is, you need to again incorporate that into the outcomes of the discussion. So essentially, that's very important as a business. You need to help the stakeholders get informed choice, make an informed choice about, or calculated decision about the whether the choice that they are going to have, whether it's a go or no go. In terms of stakeholders, we've got, obviously, as we keep talking about, customers, very important, very key, because customer-centric, user-centered design would actually bringing that sense of customer focus into the organization. Domain SMEs would bring in a lot of value in terms of their rich expertise and experience of the domain, the industry, the laws, the regulations, and the policies, procedures. End users, obviously, as we discussed, they contribute in terms of their usage, the context of usage, and the practical aspect of how they use the product on the ground. The rest of the people may not have that kind of privilege, but these end users have got that sense of using the products hands-on. They've got that hands-on rich knowledge to be able to use it and communicate to the team. Then the regulators would obviously come in picture. They've got a lot of stake in terms of how the rules, the laws, and the regulations would get impacted and would impact the design of the decision, or design the product, the architecture, or the features of the product. And the sponsors would obviously would have a way, or would have a stake into how things are done, what features are put in. So sometimes, as we discussed, we need to be political with them if their decisions are not really in line. And the testers would actually help us to align ourselves with the goals. So they're going to validate and verify the product build, the decision, the architecture that we have got into, what is originally the plan, what are the requirements. So they would be the best people to actually give us the go, no go in terms of whether the build is ready to be deployed into the production server or not, for example. So these are the list of the stakeholders that you would need to engage with the approval. In terms of the techniques, we've got the acceptance and valuation criteria, which is the new one compared to the ones that we've discussed all the way through. So acceptance criteria, very important, because that's what would actually help you understand whether we've met the success criteria or not, whether we've actually achieved what we have set out for. So, for example, in the context of Agile, we use something called as given, when, and then. So these are the set of gherkin statements, as what we call, that we would write for every user story. And then these are the ones that get tested. And once all of them, this 10, 15, 20 set of acceptance criteria that you wrote for a user story are done, or in place, or they are met, that's when you say that the story is now complete. So that's done. So the story or a feature is only ready or done or completely implemented in the context of Agile development only when it is actually completed or met all the acceptance criteria that are attached to that particular feature. So very important, because otherwise we won't have any clue. How can you say something is right, something is complete, and what basis? Similarly, how can you say when the sprint is done, when it is complete, when it is sprint goals are met or not? So that's important, that we need to have that sense of critical success factors, and how can we measure our success? What are the ways that you can try and say whether this is a success or a failure? So we need to have that beforehand. Item tracking, again, very important and very relevant in the context of what we try and do with the backlog management. With, again, the items here could mean requirements, could change requests, changes to the requirements, defects, tasks, technical tasks, all of them need to be. And then decision analysis, very critical, that would be used to get to a decision as whether you're approving the requirement or rejecting that. And reviews, again, would come critical here, because you're trying to engage the reviews of customers, customer reviews, user reviews, peer reviews, end-to-end customers, and even the reviews that you do as part of your audits, and internal reviews of your own team, performed either by your own team members or from some other teams within the organization as a kind of a measure to improve your processes, improve how you're doing things. So again, all of those form part of the reviews. So again, very important for us to have this, because that would then lead to a decision whether you've actually taken that particular requirement or the change on board and then implement that as part of your product and deliver it. So this is the kind of logical conclusion to the whole set of the activities that we do within the knowledge area of requirements lifecycle management.